Actually, things turned out better than I expected with the 6600 XT launch. There's still stock at my local Micro Center. Not a lot, but it's there. And it is hovering around $400, give or take. So up on the menu today is the ASRock PhantomGaming Radeon 6600 XT. I don't know what MSRP on this is. It probably wildly varies, but this is a 6600 XT that has some pretty unique features. Let's take a look. What do you get in the box? The graphics card. That's pretty much it. This is a 2.5 slot card. Don't let them fool you. It's like, oh, it's 2 slots. It's not 2 slots. Now this is a 6600 XT that has some heft to it. It's almost like ASRock had a bunch of other coolers laying around and they were like, you know what? Let's just shove a 6700 XT cooler on there because that is absolutely redonkulous. It still only takes a single 8-pin power connector, which makes sense because, you know, the upper limit for these cards, or the recommended upper limit from AMD, is about 160 watts. We've seen some variation in that. Total board power, of course. Just the GPU part, not taking into account any inefficiencies in the board, quite a bit less than that, around 130 watts, give or take. So it's just a little beyond what you can get through the PCIe slot alone. And this card is not really any different. We can see that there is actually a little bit of a thermal connection right here in this area for our backplate. Our backplate is mostly pass-through because, you know, from here to the back of the card is nothing but heatsink. This rear fan, this is just basically straight pass-through. It's passing all of the air through the card because the printed circuit board for the card ends here, and that helps a lot of breathability. It's a nice feature. In terms of outputs, 3 DisplayPort, 1 HDMI. DisplayPort 1.4, HDMI 2.1, variable refresh rate. If you're living under a rock and you haven't checked out any other 6600 XT reviews, let me clue you in a little bit. The 6600 is PCI Express 4.0 by 8. That's the interface here. There is a little bit of a performance hit if you're going to run that in a PCI Express 3 system. Worst case scenario, if you have an insanely optimized game like Doom at really high frame rate, it can be not great. About 15, 20%, 25% in the worst case scenario. Real world though, it's only about 5% if you're gonna run it in a PCI Express 3.0 system. Our test system is based around the ASRock Creator X570 and the 5950X from AMD. This is a 16-core monster processor. We were running 32 gigabytes of dual rank, dual channel memory, so it's pretty much a best case scenario in terms of what you can get on the AMD platform in terms of memory performance. Overall, out of this box, this card is about 3 to 5% faster than I would say the lowest 6600 XT performance that we've tested so far. Overclocking with this card gets really close to 2700 megahertz at your maximum core boost clock, which is really pretty good. Not every card that I've tested that's the 6600 XT can do that. Of course, the baseline performance of this card is basically in line with every other 6600 XT. It's not going to be 10 frames per second faster. We also get in a lot of Linux testing with this. If you are interested in Linux usage, we tested it with and without Proton Game, native Linux games, as well as Proton games under Steam, and there's a full video on getting it up and running with Ubuntu Desktop 21.04 over on the Linux channel. You can check that out if you're really interested, but the performance is right where it should be for a 6600 XT. As I mentioned before, this is a 3-fan cooling design, with the middle fan being RGB. You can change the fan and this PhantomGaming thing on the side here. This will follow your RGB color scheme, which is a pretty nice touch. In terms of other features on the card, there's no BIOS switch or RGB header or extra fan header or anything like that. It is a substantial feeling card. It's a heat pipe type design. There are 3 heat pipes that feed off of the hot area on this particular GPU. 2 of the pipes sort of wrap around for this wider heatsink to bring some cooling up into this area and the bottom area here. It's got pretty good fin spacing, so these fans are not gonna have to work too hard to push a lot of air through this particular cooler. From our testing, this cooler is overkill, way overkill for this card, even with a maximum overclock. It's really unusual if you see this card push past about 62 degrees C under the worst of scenarios. And really in normal non-overclock scenarios, it's probably gonna be around 55 degrees C. So ASRock has really just unbelievably overbuilt the cooler on this card, which is maybe a nice thing if you're going for a quiet system, if you want a system that, you know, doesn't really make any fan noise, or if like the ramping fan noise drives you insane. Well, this is probably the card for you. Depending on your power supply and other things, you may actually be able to hear the card ramp up and down. You know, if you've got coil whine in your power supply or something like that. This card did not have any coil whine in our test systems that we set up, but it's sometimes certain combinations of motherboard and power supply, or power supply and video card, that can cause that. And this card is quiet enough that you would barely notice the audio. In terms of other non-gaming features, what about the encoder? What about game streaming? Well, AMD's own built-in software does a pretty good job, but if you're going to use something like OBS, you can get there. You need to plug in for it, and you got to do a couple other things. It's really kind of embarrassing how much of an uphill battle you have with OBS on AMD cards. AMD really needs to reach out to the Open Broadcaster project and maybe make amends or build some bridges, something, because the encoder's got the goods. I mean, it can do H.265, it can do H.264 at 90 FPS, 4K, no problem, 120 FPS, give or take. VP9, you know, it ticks all of the boxes. The hardware encoder is definitely there. The decoding really works great, because you can do all the hardware decoding on YouTube and everything else. But the software is a little fiddly. And so if you use AMD's streaming thing with the Radeon overlay, you can get an idea of how well it works. And then if you go to recreate that setup in OBS, it's a little bit of an uphill battle, and I'm not sure why. I really have probably spent too much time trying to figure that out. It's a little bit of a struggle. I might be doing something wrong. I'd love to do a separate video on that, or figure it out, because the hardware is there. I can see that the hardware works really well for that kind of thing. I just don't know why it doesn't expose it in the software that I want to use. It's really very kind of baffling. But in terms of other capabilities, the benchmarks here really, you know, this card is marketed as a 1080p graphics gaming card. And 1080p gaming, I mean, there have been 1080p cards for the last decade. I think that's a little misleading to call this a 1080p graphics card. If you're going to play non-ray tracing titles, 1440p 90 FPS is achievable in most titles. 1080p 60 FPS is really referring to ray tracing, and it's not maximum ray tracing. It's really like upper middle of the road, like medium high settings, depending on what you're going for. Fidelity FX super resolution, of course, is a thing that you can enable and get a little bit more of a performance bump if that's what you're looking for. The performance is going to vary a little bit from game to game. If you're playing Fortnite, well, this thing can do 62, 63 FPS in Fortnite at 4K with like medium high settings, which is kind of nuts for a PCI Express by 8 graphics card that's, you know, the 6600 XT in general MSRP baseline is $379. Now this is a more premium model. This one is going to be a little bit more expensive. Vote with your wallet, shop around, check for deals, that kind of thing. But if you look at what other cards are selling for, it's probably a pretty good deal. AMD has positioned this card against the 3060. In some situations, it can go toe-to-toe with the 3060 Ti. Real-world market conditions right now, it's quite a bit cheaper than the 3060 and quite a bit cheaper than the 3060 Ti. Of course, if you just look at the MSRP number and you have tunnel vision for that, it doesn't look as good, admittedly. But if you look at what you can actually buy cards for, this card at 1080p with the ray tracing features for around $400, $450, it's not a bad deal if you have to have a graphics card right now. In terms of ASRock's specific implementation, well, I mean, I can compare this against our other 6600 XTs, as well as our NVIDIA 2060 reference, which I think is, that's the eBay thing. It's like, look at eBay, they were selling for $500 when this thing launched, when the 6600 XT launched. $500 for 2060, which is $150 more than it was when it launched, which seems crazy to me because this card is dramatically better than a 2060. Has the price on 2060s come down? And yeah, it actually has a little bit. We're at like $450. So I don't know. It's really up to AMD to keep the market fed with supply in order to drive down the prices of old GPUs because, there's a lot of them. A lot of them. So, I don't know. Yeah, the market situation kind of sucks. The global situation kind of sucks. But this card definitely doesn't. This is a really impressive implementation of the 6600 XT. And we've got a build planned for this. We're going to do a small form factor build based around the Intel i9-11900K and the 6600 XT because small form factor. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. I'm signing out. Get subscribed, stay tuned, come to the forum to check out that build video, check out our Linux video. I'm signing out, and I'll see you in the Level 1 forums.